Is that all right with you, John?
Thank you.
Good morning, Kimmy. I didn't say hello to you when you arrived.
How are you?
Excellent, thank you.
Good. Which part of the world are you in now, or the UK?
Oh yeah, no, I'm still at home. Yeah, still here in Manchester. Yeah.
John always has these wonderful adventures all around the country. I'm very jealous of.
Where are you staying, John? Does that mean you've got multiple houses?
Just come back from the Scottish Highlands, which is a great love of mine. And before that, I was in the Isles of Scilly Isles.
Oh, lovely. Wow.
I can thoroughly recommend it. Not the easiest of places to get to, but truly wonderful. No. Yeah.
And are they accessible with COVID? I wasn't sure if, they're a bit like Channel Islands where they're sort of cut themselves off.
No, I don't think you have to quarantine.
They are accessible. Social distancing and restricted seating in restaurants and that kind of thing, but no great impingement really.
Is that work? Is that through the National Trust work that you do? I think you mentioned something you're doing with National Trust.
I do volunteer for the National Trust, but no, that's quite separate. Yeah.
Just holiday. Lovely.
Yeah. In fact, I go in there after I'm off down to our local National Trust property after this meeting.
Well, you should have good weather.
So is it? It's Abbas we're waiting for, is it, Kimmy and David?
Yes, I've spoken to him, so I think he's trying to join. I don't know.
I can see something happening.
Yeah, I think he's in the process of joining us, I think.
And I can't see Andrew, Nadia, or Sarah.
Yeah, they're.
Do you want to introduce yourself briefly, guys?
No, Andrew's connected. Nadia is. And Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hopping. I've worked in the team for a few years now. I'm going to keep my camera off because I've been really poorly and I just don't want to expose anyone to it. The look, the state of me, not the illness.
I'm Andrew Fraser. I'm an associate structural engineer at Atkins, and I'll be keeping my camera off in this session today.
Okay, fine.
Hi, I'm Deir Abdulbaki. I work with Matt in the site team. I'm currently struggling to put my camera on. Zoom won't let me, but if it does during the course of the call, I will do so.
Nadia, with our IT, you have to, it might prompt you. There'll be a button in the top left-hand corner that unblocks the access. We struggle with Zoom compatibility on government IT.
Yeah, I've tried that. But
that's still not working. Okay. That's the level of my IT knowledge.
Thanks anyway, Suzanne.
Right, is Abbas there? I can see some musical instruments. Ed, while we're waiting for Abbas, did you want me to show the slides, or are you happy to project from your screen?
Yeah, does John, Abbas and Kimmy know sort of the MHCLG team? I mean, I'm Ed Newman-Sanders. I'm a structural engineer and I'm a technical director at Atkins. So I'm leading the structural team. We're obviously working with our F&G colleagues. F&G are assisting in the program management and any procurement activity. So, but my role is to lead the structural team. So Andrew Fraser is a colleague of mine. He's a concrete specialist and has been helping out with a lot of the sort of analysis and assessment work. And then Stephen Edwards is our regular eyes and ears on the ground. So Stephen visits the site every week and reports back on condition. That said, I do also visit the site periodically, but Stephen is our regular eyes and ears. Suzanne, do you want to introduce the MHCLG team? Or are they all known?
Yes, happy to. So apologies. I think people have heard from Sarah and Nadir and Andrew, your colleague Ed. If anyone doesn't know me, I'm Suzanne Kokonowski. I'm working in the Ministry of Housing on the Grenfell site programme, and I've worked for the government in MHCLG on the response to the fire. I'm lead on some of our community relations here, clearly not in an engineering capacity, but hopefully to help facilitate the conversation. And Kimia and Abbas, I was saying, you know, from our perspective, this is to allow, you know, John to meet with Ed and Andrew, ask any questions if there is information you require, you know, we're happy to provide that. This is a open conversation designed to information share and be as helpful as we can. So that's it from our perspective, and I'm here to sort of facilitate the conversation if that's required, and any follow up as we agree. Matt, do you just want to explain your? I'm sorry, Ed.
Thanks, Suzanne. Matt Hogan, I think most people on the call know me, head of site management from MHCLG, and here just in a supportive capacity to the engineers today.
Have we covered everyone? I think that is everyone. Still can't see Abbas.
No.
Shall we get started? Because I
Yeah.
don't think we should hold everybody up. Oh, there he is.
Is it worthwhile, Suzanne, just sort of briefly covering the sort of the scope, the safety works, and the fact that that is separate from the Memorial Commission before we start the conversation, or do you want to pick that up at the end?
I think, John, would that be helpful to you? I don't know how much background you've got.
I'm sure it would be. I'm not sure what that's going to involve, but I think anything would be helpful, I'm sure. Yeah, thank you, Ed.
So I think Kimia, David and Abbas will be familiar, but for John's benefit, and we've got a couple of slides which summarise kind of the engineering perspective, but before we get into that, so a bit of history. So Grenfell Tower was owned and the responsibility of RBKC, the local authority, as I'm sure you're aware. Following the fire in the first 12 months or so, there was an interim team that Matt worked in, which was led by a different local authority, brought in as part of the PAN local government response. And they led with engineering contractors and I think the support of London Fire Brigade and first responders in those initial months in terms of stabilisation and safety of the building. And at that point, it was a crime scene effectively under the control of the police in terms of evidence retrieval. When the police in 2018 indicated that they were no longer having a requirement for the building, in theory, it should have reverted to council ownership, but collectively, including the government, it was agreed that it would be inappropriate for the building to return to council ownership. And as such, MHCLG for the government took over ownership of the tower and is to prevent the council from all in decisions on the tower or the memorial. And prior to that point, there were early discussions about responsibilities for the tower as distinct from a memorial, assumed to be a memorial on the Grenfell Tower site. But it was agreed, again, this was before MHCLG took ownership. It was agreed between RBKC, the government, and in consultation, early consultation with representatives from the community at the time, that the community, bereaved survivors and local residents should determine the long-term future of their site. And government and the council issued a statement that indicated they did not have a perspective on what should go on the site. There was some rumours about redeveloping the site, and the council and government were very clear that they, that did not come from them. They did not have a perspective on that. And so that statement was issued, and it was put into the hands of the community, which then led to the establishment of the Grenfell Tower Memorial Commission, which is a group of community representatives to determine what is assumed to be the memorial on the site. But within that context, public authorities, again at that time, led by the government, not necessarily assuming to be us, although it did turn out, when we took ownership of the tower, turned out to be us. It was that public authorities would need to retain ownership of the tower itself. And that was with the view to maintaining safety on the site. Obviously, from the very early days of the fire, it's been clear that the tower has been badly damaged. So our perspective has been that we've taken ownership of the site to maintain safety, maintain responsibility for the site. We see ourselves as temporary owners of the land, the freehold land that the site remains on, and we hope to transfer that to whatever the memorial and long-term ownership of that is determined by the community. And within the site and safety responsibilities, that includes a decision for public authorities on the future of the tower. And by that, I mean whether and if it needs to carefully be taken down. So we've distinguished between the role of public authorities, subsequently government, versus the role of the community in determining the nature of the memorial and the long-term ownership of that land. Again, that is not something that, we particularly have a view on. We understand that people might not want it to be government land for long-term. Certainly, I'm sure strong views against the land returning to the council. But again, the council and the government have given over that responsibility. So that's a bit of the context. It does make a quite complicated setup between decisions on the tower and the role of the Memorial Commission. So I'm sure we might get a little bit into that more as we go forward.
Okay.
Can I just say, Suzanne, thank you for giving your context through the prism of MHCLG, but there is a different context. And I think it's really important to put that here as well, because this is why it's important that we're having these discussions and why these conversations have been happening outside of the system that's been set up. First of all, you said that the councils, the council wouldn't have any role about the decisions around the future of the tower, and yet we know that the Memorial Commission has been having meetings with council leader, and the co-chairs have. Now, that was never announced, it was not minuted, we don't know what conversations took place and what was said, and the only thing that was minuted, the only reference to it was when in one of the minutes of the Memorial Commission meeting where the co-chair said, we met with the leader of the council and everything was fine. It went very well. What went very well? What is the definition of well? What was discussed? Why wasn't that minuted? Why was no one else at that meeting from the Memorial Commission? You talked about the rumors. I think that you need to perhaps change the semantics. These things are not rumors, they are fears. they're expressions of fears. When MHCLG talks about rumors, it creates this feeling that something of a kind of an us and them type of situation. When people are talking about their fears, it's not a rumor. And I think that the semantics do matter. And perhaps it would be a good idea to stop talking about what people's fears are as rumors. So when they were having fears about, really rational fears about the potential of redevelopment on the land, it would be better to come at it from acknowledging that these are fears. You talked about the establishment of the Memorial Commission to determine what will be the memorial on the site. As you know, and I think again this needs to be acknowledged, right from the beginning when the Memorial Commission sort of set up was announced, there were very strong condemnation of that system that was being set up, that it was skewing towards people having a lot more undue influence on it, and how it was done, and the voting system, which was extremely Byzantine and complex, didn't really reflect and didn't allow people to speak. There was media coverage of people saying this was not something, especially from the bereaved and the next of kin, that the next of kin was saying this, that they did not want to have representation, and no one can represent their views. We asked for ex officio attendance, we never got a response to that. So there are many issues around the actual way that this whole thing has been set up, which are creating the problems that we're having in terms of trying to reach consensus, as well as the fact that there is real legitimate concerns around the way that different voices are shut down. The culture of the Memorial Commission in terms of the people who are listened to and who are in there, and even the engagement processes where it's been a very hostile atmosphere, and where people who are being given the platform by MHCLG and endorsed by MHCLG are attending these Memorial Commission drop-in sessions, against whom there are many, many examples of online social bullying and threats, and even saying to people who show up, oh, you're talking to the wrong people, you shouldn't be talking to X and Y. So these are things that you don't take any notice of, MHCLG and Memorial Commission. And I think that it really, really needs to be acknowledged, and you need to reset and think about those things seriously, because it creates an atmosphere which is very divisive and is creating hostilities. The 5 bereaved members representatives who are on the Memorial Commission, who are in the room, and as you know, we didn't even have minutes of those meetings for over a year. We didn't even know the identity of the Memorial Commission representatives, so-called representatives, for more than a year. It took a lot of effort to get the MHCLG people and the Memorial Commission to be transparent. So all of these discussions were going on. And of those 5 people, 4 of them don't even represent their own families. There are distinct divisions within those families. So whatever is discussed and decided by the Memorial Commission lacks fundamentally the authority to be taken seriously from the point of view of all of these other people who should have a say, who are outside of your system and systemically kept outside. And that is why we're here today, because those people are having different conversations, and yet the system continues to validate what it wants to do. And I just think that the fact that you now mentioning we've noticed recently that there's a mention of, oh, and there's going to be a decision about the long-term ownership of the land. You know, again, there's been no discussion with anyone about that. And that's again a very, very sensitive and important topic. I can't just throw it into the mix, you know, in between all the other things that are being said. It has to be a distinct standalone conversation that focuses people on that issue. So I just want to make sure there are, you know, when you look at the problem, you also have to acknowledge there are different prisms through which you need to look at the problem.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Thank you, Camille.
Okay, shall I share my slides?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Ed.
Oh God, I'm not used to doing it in Zoom. One sec. There we go. What am I showing? That one. Oh no, you don't want to see that. Can you see my screen?
No.
Not yet.
Oh, yeah.
Might be coming.
Oh, why isn't that working? Oh, I need to press share.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you see a grey screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Ed.
Let me. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So there are 4 slides, as Suzanne said, just summarising our observations and the subsequent advice that we've given to the MHCLG. So the structure of the tower was badly damaged by the fire, and we've assessed the varying levels of damage within the tower. So we've done a detailed walk through the tower, and we regularly, as I said at the beginning, visit the tower and compare the current state of the structure with that kind of baseline walkthrough we did at the beginning of our involvement. The fire had the effect of causing concrete to spall, and I'll talk about what spalling is in a second, and crack on the underside of the slabs. And that's most widespread from 10th floor upwards. So from 10th floor upwards, with varying degrees of damage, but pretty much each flat on every floor has been damaged. So there are some flats where the slab has deflected significantly by up to sort of 250 millimeters. There are other flats above 10th floor where the spalling has been less significant, but nonetheless above 10th floor, there's widespread damage in most of the flats on each floor. And spalling can be defined as the loss of surface material from a concrete member, whether that be a slab, a wall, a column, or a beam. But the key thing is when concrete spalls, it leaves the reinforcement exposed. John will clearly know this, but reinforcement is required in concrete to give it tension capacity. Concrete is good in compression, but bad in tension. So if the reinforcement is left exposed and or becomes debonded, so with corrosion, it reduces the strength of the structure. So we've advised that floors above the 10th floor are significantly damaged, as they've experienced the greatest level of exposure to the fire. The 4th to 10th floors are less damaged, but still badly damaged. However, the level of damage increases as you go from 4th up to 10th. So broadly speaking, from sort of 4th to 7th, I would say there are sort of 1 or 2 flats per floor that have been damaged, and then from 7th to 10th, there are possibly 3 or 4 flats per floor that have been damaged. And then the rest of the building below level 4 has really not been damaged significantly in terms of the structural damage, but clearly there are other impacts the fire had. So the reduction in the strength of the tower resulting from this damage is the reason that the props were installed. So immediately after the fire, props were installed. There are clusters of props within each flat, and those props go all the way down to ground level. And the intention of those props was to allow the investigations to occur, and then for the debris from within each flat to be removed. Okay, next slide. So these aren't photos of the Grenfell Tower. So what I didn't say at the beginning is the numbers across the bottom relate to the presentation that we've been giving to the community groups. So this is sort of the focused bit on the structural engineers' observations and advice, and that's why it's highlighting point 3. But the reason I say that is because we didn't want to share photos of the actual tower. So these are photos of similar situations, but are reflective of what we've seen in the tower. So the one on the left shows the concrete from the soffit, or the underside of the slab, has spooled away, and some of the reinforcement you can see has also dropped and fallen away, so there is no anchorage of any sort with the slab soffit. And that is very indicative of a lot of the flats above level 10. We have widespread spalling of the concrete to that sort of level. That said, and as I said earlier, there are other areas where spalling has occurred, but the reinforcement hasn't been exposed. And then the photo on the right is similar, but it's just showing a column whereby you can see the concrete spalled off, and the reinforcement has been subject to corrosion, which in itself can then cause further spalling. Okay, so whoops. Can you see corrosion and spalling?
Yes.
Yep. So in addition to the reduction in strength immediately following the fire, we're now seeing the longer term consequences of the fire. So undamaged concrete protects the steel from corroding, as I said previously, but where cracking or spalling has occurred, in the presence of oxygen and water, the reinforcement will corrode. As previously mentioned, spalling can be defined as a loss of surface material from the concrete, and it's resulted initially from the direct fire damage. So during the fire, the concrete spalled, but in addition to the act of corroding reinforcement causing further spalling, there's also something called the freeze-thaw action, whereby moisture that is within the concrete, when it freezes, expands and causes further spalling. What I haven't mentioned yet, and normally in this presentation, Matt talks about it in section 2, but the building is wrapped in a wrap. That wrap is attached to scaffolding, and the scaffolding supports its own weight vertically, but then is restrained laterally from the building stability structure. But what that wrap does, it keeps sort of the driven rain out, but what it can't do is control the temperature or humidity within the tower. And so even with this propping in place, the deterioration of the structure is ongoing. The wrap can't prevent that. So we've advised that whilst the rate of deterioration is too difficult to quantify accurately across the whole structure, the condition of the structure we know will deteriorate over time if left in its current condition. And we can see this on our regular site visits. There are instances of further spalled concrete. There are instances of specks of reinforcement on the floor. And in addition to that, we've got test panels throughout the building where we conduct half-cell potential tests to monitor trends of reinforcement corrosion. And those are all sort of confirming this advice that the condition of the structure is deteriorating over time. One thing I haven't mentioned about, excuse me, about our monitoring of the tower is that we have movement monitoring that's live. So Ploughman Craven have put some prisons at the top of the tower that enable us to very accurately understand trends in movement in all 3 axes, vertical and 2 horizontal axes. And also we have what we call distometers, measuring the distance between floor slabs. We also have tilt meters in the areas where our slabs have sagged most significantly. We want to make sure that the rotations of those specific slabs and across joints where construction joints have opened up, that those are fully understood and monitored as well. So in addition to the visual monitoring and this half-cell potential monitoring I've just mentioned, there is a lot of live data around the tower's movement that we use as well. Okay, so all of the works we've completed to date, including the installation of the props I mentioned, removal of heavy items within the tower and other debris, and the wrapping of the tower, have been completed to protect the tower, to keep it stable and minimize the risk to everyone who lives, studies or works near the tower. And as I said, the propping doesn't stop the tower from deteriorating further. So we've advised that even though propping has been placed within the tower to keep it stable, the building structure was severely damaged by the fire. Consequently, our advice has been, therefore, that parts of the structure should be deconstructed at the earliest opportunity, and as a minimum, down to the 10th floor level, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, in light of the levels of damage above that floor. And that's primarily due to the damage sustained in the fire, but also due to the ongoing risk of deterioration. And this advice has been corroborated by other parties. So our dangerous structures surveyor, a company called Michael Barclay Partnership, and also a third-party reviewer from Jacobs have looked through all our advice and corroborated the outcomes of that. So that's all I was. Oh, there was one other thing to say. So there is additional propping planned to go in the tower, and this is a lot of the work that we have been doing. We have been reviewing the design of the temporary works designer around the next phase of propping. So the intention is to put further propping in the tower between this summer and next summer, and a contractor, I think, has just started today. So he's been appointed and the handover occurred yesterday, and their job is to install new props within the tower that will ensure its medium to long-term stability, but also depending on the decision the Secretary of State takes around the deconstruction of the tower, will also have the capacity, if required, to support any deconstruction loads within the tower, if that were to be required. But the key point to make here is that that propping isn't going to affect the existing building as it stands in any way, and there will be no deconstruction of the tower if that decision were taken this side of the 5th anniversary. So I think that's all I want to say. Suzanne, is there anything that you think I've missed or you want to contribute?
Well, just to explain the green box on the right hand side. What the government has said as part of this kind of discussion, again linked to kind of what Ed's explained, is that parts of the tower can be retained for a memorial if that is what the Commission on behalf of the community indicate that they would like, and by that we are meaning potentially some of the more damaged parts not in situ, if there is a desire, for example, like 9/11, to retain some of the damaged parts for, you know, symbolic reasons and to ensure that those are continue to be visible. Or it could be, or both, some of the less damaged lower floors. That could be an outline, or it could be again some of the sort of lower height floors. There's been talk, for example, of a Coventry Cathedral style option where you can retain part of the existing building and then incorporate it into something new. Those options remain in principle available, and part of this is, you know, the technical advice about viability, but those as principles are available to the Commission if that is what they decide.
Well, can I just say, well, that's really great to hear that, Suzanne, because that's the first time we've actually ever heard that being acknowledged. And that was the big battle to get that across, that it needs to be a proper conversation about preservation and approaching it from a different point of view. You just said, was it Ed?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Ed. You were just talking about how you said two things which obviously ring lots of alarm bells in people, but in a way, I think it needs to be clarified when you say the deterioration is ongoing and the condition of the structure will deteriorate over time left as it is. Well, that's the case of any structure, any house, any building, you know, it deteriorates over time. That's just a given fact. And the building has been damaged by fire. Of course it has, we know that. So the issue here is, and it's perhaps unfair to put it at your door, because the issue here is really whether the right questions have been asked, which is not about, is this a damaged building by a fire? The answer to which is yes, of course it is. And will it deteriorate over time? Yes, of course it will, because that's what happens. But rather, what is the optimum level of preservation? How can we approach this from a preservation point of view to retain as much of the structure as possible, given the moral and symbolic and emotional attachment to this site as a tragedy? And I'd like to also add that it is really important to acknowledge that this was the very first and hopefully the last national tragedy that affected the Black and ethnic minority population of Britain. And we are part of this history, we are part of this building. And it's very important that as a legacy and as a national memorial, it is not obliterated, but given that symbolism and presence that it deserves as it affected Black and Asian minority British people. And that's why it's important that we approach it from a symbolic point of view.
Can I just chip in quickly, Kimmy? So you're absolutely right. You know, all buildings do deteriorate, but all buildings have a finite life. So we design buildings for a design life. And it's important to note that this building is nearing the end of its design life, but it was never designed to be exposed in the way it is being exposed.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. And I understand that. And it's interesting because that came up with the previous conversation when John talked about the exposure of the exterior. And so, of course, at the beginning, before cladding, that's exactly what tower was. It didn't have any coverage. It was just the concrete block. And the point is that there can be mitigating design and structural solutions to that. So you can preserve and protect what remains. You know, there are solutions to that. So yes, it's at the end of it. So all I'm saying is we need to be asking different questions for very good reason. That's all. And then getting those answers in place to make those decisions. Yeah, well, if you give people the option, if you give people the information that this is a fire damaged building, it's come to the end of its life and it's deteriorating, you know, then people are filled with a fear to think that they have no option. And that's why this letter that went out and what happened was sort of really misjudged, because it didn't even give people the option of asking questions about any other options until we intervened and said, no, hang on a minute, you need to be asking some different questions. Yeah, it's not about giving people no options. Yeah.
Ed, do you mind taking a screen down?
Oh, sorry, I forgot it was up.
That's all right. I'm struggling to see people. Thank you.
Is that all right?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
The Coventry Cathedral example, actually, Suzanne, and of course, the one that because I've been mentioning that a lot as well, is that, and also you've also got the example of York, you know, that was fire damaged. And you've got the example of Plymouth, I think it's called St. Charles Cross or something, which is right in the middle of the Plymouth Centre. And this was a church that was bombed repeatedly during the Blitz. And the decision then was the symbolic importance of this, what remained of it was to preserve as much of it as possible. And if you look at that structure, I mean, it's extraordinary how they've managed to keep it up all these years, but bits of it have still there, and it's actually in the middle of a roundabout. It's been made a feature of the city.
Yeah. Well, I think from our perspective, appreciate this is a difficult conversation, and as I hope we've relayed, there's quite long lead-in times even before anything, if there is a decision happens. So from our perspective, there is absolutely sort of time to work that sort of thing through, and again, the principle is there, and we need the Memorial Commission to determine the outline nature of a memorial, which then will then get into some of these discussions. But absolutely, the principle of preservation of parts of the tower is definitely there.
Okay.
How would Memorial Commission do that? Outline the memorial, all this stuff. Everybody knows here the engagement is absolutely crap. Nobody attends. They can't just decide on our behalf. Definitely, that's from our estate, Susanna.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, Abbas, because I was just made a note to come back to that later, because I thought I can't be the one that keeps on saying these things. That's absolutely the point. How can the Memorial Commission to determine the outline nature of the memorial when we have an issue with the way that the Memorial Commission was set up and is operating in the first place, and its closed nature, the lack of transparency, and the hostility of hearing anything else outside of what they've all agreed to discuss?
Yeah, and Suzanne, can I just make a point that I spoke to the principal designer, and she doesn't know anything about this idea of still having part of the tower there when I spoke to her. So surely it would be helpful for them to be at least talking about the possibilities, because it seems to me that this is the first time this has actually come up, and it's only because people are asking about it. And does that mean it's actually going to be taken seriously? I mean, we haven't seen the Memorial Commission are having an engagement on our estate, which they haven't bothered to tell anyone about. They just decided to tweet out that they were coming here to have an engagement. They haven't asked us if they can book the room, where they want to be. I mean, they don't seem to be very connected to the people they're talking to. The last engagement I went to, which was at Clement James, which is like 10 yards away from where I'm sitting here now, they couldn't even get the representatives of Lancaster West to attend. So, and there were about 3 people went to that one. I mean, it's not really the engagement you need to make a decision of this size and magnitude. And I believe there's also been problems with the Kaizen engagement you've been running externally. And I think at the moment they're not actually talking to anyone anymore, or not doing any door knocking. So what I'm saying is that you have a big problem. You need to try and connect properly with people. And I think the way the Memorial Commission have done this by just not talking to anyone, doing everything in secrecy, doesn't fill me with much confidence that they're going to get a decision.
Absolutely, and they're so-called representatives. You know, there's these little cliques. It's very hostile. They literally shut you down. They say they don't want to talk to this one. They will talk to this one, but not to this one. You know, there's a real imbalance and injustice and hostility, and we can even demonstrate it with facts, with tweets, with screenshots of messages that have been sent to people, you know. And I think it's really, really, really wrong for you to be putting all this power in the hands of the Memorial Commission when we can demonstrate why it's dysfunctional and toxic.
They're not neutral.
Not at all. In fact, they deliberately and systemically shut down any other conversation, to the point that when we started discussing, as a result of a man who lost his baby, who came up with this idea of preservation and the tower being reborn, which we felt was really appropriate, because you're creating a compromise solution, because you've got people who feel very strongly about it not being preserved, and you've got people who live on the estate who don't want to look at it as it is. And so the compromise solution was, how much of it can we preserve? How can we transform it, et cetera, et cetera. And this was the first time where there was a hopeful, positive conversation. And we took the initiative that came from a next of kin who lost his baby, that had the backing of all of the next of kin in the next of kin, 36 of the 72 people now. So that's 50% of the people who died. And the terms of reference actually say, the final decision will come down to the next of kin, or you define it as bereaved, but essentially as the next of kin. we were trying to build a coalition and a compromise with the estate. And what was the response of the Memorial Commission and MHCLG? Was to stoke, and RBKC was to stoke up hostility to the point where they're tearing down posters and start threatening people the minute the conversation started getting any traction. Now, whether that's coming from a position of ego, because it's like whoever thinks about, you know, people want to own the idea, and we're not interested in that. No one's interested in that. Marcia's even said that. It's not about whose idea, it's about finding solutions. We're in the best position to find solutions and compromise because we're dealing with the people on a minute by minute basis, and we can gauge what's happening and what they want to hear and how they want to express themselves. It's shut down, systemically shut down. And they're tearing posters down. The one thing that was always sacrosanct was that the hoarding around the tower, nobody ever touches even a dead flower. It was almost like this unwritten law from day one that if people leave a post-it note, you save the post-it note. If you put a picture, no one writes over anybody else. No one covers anything for everyone else. In fact, it's the only part of North Kensington where there's any civility and decency and respect left, because there have been so many divisions. And this hoarding was sacrosanct, and anything that's left on it is sacrosanct. We put a poster up on the other side of the hoarding, not even on the main bit, on the other side. And what happens is you've got these foot soldiers that go out and start tearing and tore the posters down. That is an absolute, it's almost violent, because it's such an affront. It's such an affront to go and touch that when we've all accepted, as the people who've been watching this thing from the beginning, that the unsaid law, the boundary that we don't touch each other's words and memories and expressions around even the area, never mind their hoarding. You know, there's teddy bears there that have been there for 4 years, you know, and yet nobody says anything or does anything. You need to police, and not police, but you need to protect the voice of people who want other ideas discussed. Because you're the adult in the room, or should be.
Well, I can certainly guarantee that MHCLG has not been tearing down posters. On the commission and its engagement, you know, I think it is at an early stage, and I would certainly expect them to be covering issues like preservation.
They've had a year and a half.
And indeed ownership.
Suzanne. Sorry to speak over you, but I was saying they've had a year and a half to do this engagement. How has it come in still at an early stage where all they've managed to come up with is that the people would like it to be peaceful and calming? I mean, that's not really much use to anyone as a piece of engagement. It doesn't provide any of the answers you need here.
I'm conscious John's been very patient. We can make this meeting into discussing the Memorial Commission if that is helpful. But from my perspective, we have agreed, or certainly made that offer that I talked about in terms of preservation to the Commission. They are aware of it and, you know, responsive, but they're not at the stage, I think, yet when they've completed their engagement or got further with their engagement to even sort of bottom out what sort of thing people are thinking about. You've seen the emotions. They're starting at a much earlier stage than that. So that is our position, and as I say, I would fully expect them to come on to discussing those sort of issues with the community.
Hang on a minute. They're supposed, according to your timeline, they're supposed to be making their recommendations by, we've been told by the end of July. They're supposed to be writing a report to present to the Secretary of State in order for him to consider and make a decision about in September. So bearing in mind that August is basically a shutdown, you know, you're saying that you have made the offer to the Commission, but they're not yet completed their engagement or at the stage to make a decision or whatever. And you're talking about days. You're talking about days away before they're supposed to.
They don't need to take any position by the end of July or September. If the government makes a decision on the future of the tower, it would come with that commitment that I've talked about. And again, the lead-in times before anything really happens, in my view, allow the Commission to get further with its work, with the aim of producing a report on behalf of the community about what people wish in terms of a memorial.
Except that it says the Secretary of State will be making a decision about the demolition or not demolition of the tower by the autumn. So effectively, as Jackie said in a previous meeting we had where John was at, you know, everything is focused on and getting people to focus on what will be in the space when the tower is gone. What we're saying is that's the least of our worries. How many benches there will be and whether there will be a playground or a cafe or a toilet. That's the least of our worries. The important issue, the one that's under the cosh in terms of a timeline, is the future of the tower. And you have already said, MHCLG has already said that the Secretary of State will be making a decision about that by the end of the summer or early autumn. And yet at the same time, you're saying, well, we've made the offer to the Memorial Commission, but we don't know where they're at in terms of how they're going to present that to the Secretary of State. And at the same time, you're saying, but it will be the Memorial Commission's report that will determine whether the Secretary of State signs on the dotted line or not. So there are a lot of caveats, and there are a lot of cracks through which the future of the tower, which is extremely important to people, will fall, because once the Secretary of State signs that document, there will be no option. It will just end up being what's going to go in the space.
I don't think that's quite right. You're right in terms of there will, even with a principal decision, there will be lots of unanswered questions and lots more detail to follow. That includes things like, you know, methodology and things like that. As I say, you know, my expectation is that even if the Secretary of State takes a decision in the early autumn, that would come with the commitment on preservation that I've already talked about. And then there is time, once there is a principled decision, to work through some of that more detail, including, you know, methodology and things like that, which are of concern to residents. We understand that those are concerns and unanswered questions. We are not going to have all of that detail on day one, but this is about, you know, indicating a timeline for further for further decisions. We obviously can't do that until we've made a principled decision, because we would be preempting that decision if we got into some of those discussions before we'd done so.
But Suzanne, I just to make a point, so the Commission are going to make a recommendation about the ownership of the land in September as well, and they haven't asked a single
not in
person
September.
question.
Not in September.
So that's what it says in the timeline on the Commission's website. So
oh, right, okay, yeah.
So can I say who's been asked that question at all in this engagement that's come up with they'd like it to be peaceful and calm? Do you see? I have no faith in the way this is going from the Commission. That they're just making recommendations to push through what they want. They're not actually they're not doing any communication with the people on the ground, because it seems to me the decision's already been taken.
I think it's more
know what they want, to be honest.
Yeah.
I wouldn't conflate tower and memorial timelines necessarily. I think, David, you're right in terms of what's on their website. I think it's more like Wood's Lip. I agree with you. I can't see how they would make a recommendation in September on future ownership when they've not discussed that with people.
Yeah. And, you know, so are they going to discuss this properly before they take a decision on deconstruction or partial deconstruction?
Yeah, again, just they're not taking decisions on deconstruction. We have made an offer in terms
you have
of
to ask those questions then. MHCLG, you took that off them, so then you need to ask those questions before you make that decision.
So we have asked those questions, and that, I think, has led to conversations such as this.
But I was just saying to you that guys have stopped engaging with people because they were actually run out of one estate. So how can you say you've asked those questions?
So
and none of this is really enshrined in any kind of system that we can rely upon. It's all about, oh yeah, I think this might be happening, or that might be happening. The problem here is you're giving all the power to the Memorial Commission, which from the outset was set up to fail and has actually demonstrated real failure. And we're trying to alert you that you're going to have a problem. You are creating a bigger problem day by day by empowering only the Memorial Commission to have a say or make that report and recommendation. It's not going to work.
Okay. Look, I understand your concerns. I'm keen to bring John in. He's been quite patient. As I say, we can keep talking about the Commission if that's helpful. But John, I think you had some questions, and then perhaps if we come back to anything that you feel I haven't responded to date. Otherwise, this essentially is becoming a meeting about the Memorial Commission.
But it is a Memorial Commission decision because it is the deconstruction and demolition of the tower, the future of the tower, is going to depend on what the Memorial Commission says. So they are interlinked. We can talk about structural issues, but it doesn't mean anything if at the end of the day, whatever we do and say is ignored because the people writing that report and giving it to the Secretary of State are on their own path and doing their own thing.
Yeah.
They are.
Yes, Susan, go ahead.
We're kind of in your hands, really. We've got our engineering team here, and John is here. I'd suggest we let them go if you want to use this time to talk about the Memorial Commission, or we can, use their time while they're here and schedule anything further that you want in relation to the Commission. I leave that to you, really.
We would like to talk to them, but the thing is, Susanna, it seems it's useless whatever we ask them because it seems someone else going to call the shots. I just had a call from somebody, one of our residents, and I said, I'm in this meeting. Susan and Andrea are going to decide on our behalf. Whatever Sandra Lewis will say, they will agree with her. And this lady, she said, how come they haven't spoken to anybody? They can represent us and talk on our behalf and decide on our behalf. I'm not talking about Kimia, I'm talking about me and David. You know us very well. We don't lie, we don't exaggerate, we don't fabricate facts.
Are you saying I lie and exaggerate?
No, not at all. No, I just want to clear about me and David.
Yeah, and I want to be clear about what I do as well. Yes. So don't use words like that.
Don't worry, I'm not talking about you. I just want to talk about Kimia, hold on. So what I'm trying to say, Susanna, they haven't talked to us at all. The only time we forced them once to have meeting with us, it was only once. I can talk to Matt maybe 10 times a week. Our representatives, they're not anywhere to talk to anybody. So how they are representing us? Can you just answer this question, how they are representing us?
The Commission will not be able to take views unless they can demonstrate that they've reflected what the community want. It just wouldn't be credible. You and your community would not accept that as a report.
But here's the point. They don't. How can you then test what they're reporting and whether it's credible? I'll give you an example. Over the weekend, I was with Flora. She and her son are the only survivors from the 23rd floor. So you can't miss them. They are the only people from the top floor where the majority of people migrated to and died. More bodies were found on that top floor than anywhere else. So how can you ignore or not have ever spoken to her? One of the questions I put to her is, do you know there's a Memorial Commission and who your representatives are? No. If so, has your community representative been in touch with you? No. This is 2 years after the Memorial Commission, 72 people died, and the majority of the actual next of kin have not had. Marcio's wife, exactly the same thing. Marcio's wife said to me, why must I go to them and talk to them? They know where I am, and no one's come to me to talk to me. So what I'm saying is that at the danger of being called exaggerating and lying, the truth of the matter is that the next of kin of the 72 people have not been able to express themselves. And when they have tried to express themselves, they've been shut down, threatened, targeted, and torn down. And yet these people are going, the Memorial Commission is going to make a recommendation about the future of the tower. And that's the decision. The decision will be based on their report by the Secretary of State. And if you think that's not a problem, then you haven't learned anything at all. You're not engaging. You don't know how to engage.
Yeah, and can I add, I saw Nabil yesterday, who's in Memorial Commission. Even he has no idea what's going on, and he 100% disagree that anybody decides about tower without talking to the people who are related to this.
Yeah. Can I just turn to John? We've only got 20 minutes left, and I'm conscious of time. Okay. Do we want to continue the conversation in the way that we're having? Do you want to agree something separate, or John, do you want to come in now and then we can agree kind of how we take this forward?
Well, I think I need to take my direction from Kimmy, David and Abbas. Obviously, I'm here to ask some technical questions and then feed back the comments on the technical side. But I do feel I need to take Kimmy, David and Abbas' advice as to how they want the meeting to run.
I think that what would be really helpful is if you ask your technical questions, but I think where we need to go with this is actually we need to have a technical conversation with Memorial Commission, and it needs to be very formal so that they understand that the questions we're asking relate to preservation and that that's recorded properly, because we can't allow there to be any doubt or misunderstanding of where we're coming from at all.
Yeah, I was going to agree. I was going to say, I think perhaps if you ask the technical questions now, because everyone's on this call, but that we can schedule some other meeting to talk about the issues of the Memorial Commission, because there's obviously a lot of them. Right.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's helpful. I hope you'll understand, Suzanne, why I asked that question. The note that was on the last slide on the right-hand side that you've confirmed, Suzanne, has obviously been a great help, because that's quite categorical, and indeed that ties in with the what I think has been referred to as a physical creative solution for the future. So I've read the publicly published reports. It's clearly a very comprehensive set. I've concentrated on John Roberts' independent overview and the final design validation report, the FDV report done by Atkins, as best I can in the time available. So my understanding then, Ed or Andrew or both, is that in terms of lateral stability, wind has been identified, but there isn't a big issue there. I mean, obviously it's got a greater windage face at the minute because of the scaffolding up around it, but that isn't all in all, that's not a major concern. That's not a key issue. Yeah. Okay. It's currently a dangerous structure. Sorry, I think you must be muted, Ed.
Can you hear me now?
I can now, yeah.
Yeah, I said correct, John, with regards to the stability structure. I mean, one of the first things we did when we started our role as technical advisors at the MHCLG was pick up on that point. There is an increased wind area. Is the stability structure able to carry that? The answer is yes. The vertical structure, other than the column in the northwest corner at level 13, didn't have significant damage. There is some damage, but unsurprisingly, heat rises, and so the core itself is in a fairly good condition.
Yeah, well, that was my assumption. I was going to ask that, but that's my assumption. The core was okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, it's currently a dangerous structure, which is a statutory condition. That's relevant to buildings. do you happen to know whether if it became a memorial, would that cease to be a dangerous structure automatically? I would no longer fall under the Act, or would it still come under the auspices of the dangerous building surveyor?
Matt, you might want to chip in here, but my assumption would be any retained structure would clearly have to be repaired and protected for the design life of the memorial, and therefore would cease to be a dangerous structure.
By virtue
Can
of
you
being
say that
repaired.
again? Sorry, can you say that again?
So if any part of the structure were to be retained, it would have to be repaired. It would then have to be protected in some way in order to give it the required design life of the memorial, if it were going to form part of the memorial. And yeah, I think that's the point.
Yeah, and that ties in actually with John Roberts and your, I think, comments in your report and John Roberts' report. Okay, so columns are generally okay, apart from this one in the corner, so it's C10, I think, between the 13th and 14th floors.
But they are damaged, John, but the one in the northwest corner has significant damage.
Right,
yeah.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. It's the floors which have suffered the most, understandably, and you mentioned up to 200 mil of sagging.
Yeah.
Which is, and that is a failed floor.
Yeah.
It does vary across the floor plate, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Various levels, as you've mentioned, and again, above floor 10, that's when it starts to get more serious. Below floor 10, less so, and increasingly by the time you get down to floor.
Yeah, and widespread. I would add in the word.
Right.
Widespread above level 10.
Yes. Okay. Right. Now, in terms of retention, without sort of pinning ourselves down to a particular solution, would I be right in thinking that below level 10, it would need work, but what one might call moderate repair and established repair techniques for a structure that would no longer be in residential use? It would be a memorial structure. Well, is that a fair way of describing it, below level 10?
Yeah, I mean, I'm reluctant to define sort of anything below level 10 as to what could and couldn't be retained, because we haven't really looked at it in any great detail. As Suzanne said at the beginning, you know, our commission has been very much looking at the safety works, but clearly taking sort of levels out of it, there is a sliding scale between level 10 and level 4 as to the viability of retention.
Right, so that leads on to my, in a sense, the last question really, and that is that what kind of quantum of work would be required from a safety and a prevention of deterioration point of view in terms of retention to determine what could be retained?
Well, I think it has to be guided by the preferences of the Memorial Commission. And I say the preferences because it is not currently Atkins' commission to assess what can be retained for the memorial and what can't. We've provided some high-level guidance, but whoever does that, I think, would need to be guided by the preferences of the Memorial Commission, because at the moment, John, as I'm sure you understand, there could be an infinite number of options. You know, do I just demolish the badly sagging slabs throughout the building? Do I mean, there's so many different options because there's so much variation in the damage that to do that assessment, I would say, is not viable until we have guidance from the Memorial Commission. I say we, until there is guidance from the Memorial Commission.
Okay.
Does
Wow,
that
that's a mic drop moment, Ed, right there, because that's actually the point we've been trying to make in so many different ways. That just escalates into this emotional dialogue, because that's the point.
But in fairness,
is that the preference, it has to be guided by the preference of the
yeah. And I think in fairness,
presented.
in fairness to Suzanne, I think she's accepted that you know, the level of, again, I don't want to stray beyond my remit, so just reel me in, Suzanne, if you think you need to. But I think, you know, Suzanne and the MHCLG, from our perspective as Atkins, completely understand the fact that the level of structural retention has to be informed by the Memorial Commission.
So,
sorry, let me just write down the level of structural retention has to be informed by the Memorial Commission, right?
But validated by an engineer.
But validated by an engineer, of course, right. And do you understand then, MHCLG, you know, why it's so unfair that we have had to fight tooth and nail to be heard about this fundamental error in approach? Can you please acknowledge why it's taken so long and so much effort and so much stress just to get to this point? And instead of smirking and mocking me, at least acknowledge that I have been of service to bring you to this point.
So Kimmy, I completely understand your concern. Has Kimmy left?
She's gone.
Oh, that's a shame. What I was going to say is that this is clearly quite a complex and subtle, you know, discussion. I wouldn't want people to go away and think the Memorial Commission is determining the future of the tower. As I explained at the beginning, there are safety and responsibility requirements on public authorities, now the government, and the Memorial Commission is determining the future memorial. Within that, as I've said, the government has made a commitment that parts of the tower could be retained. And our view is that that includes the lower floors. There is then a kind of chicken and egg point in terms of what counts as lower floors. That has to be determined based on what the memorial is going to be, which is for the commission, but it also needs to be determined based on what is viable. And that gets into some of the points that Ed has said about the scale of damage, particular columns, etc. Because otherwise, you know, the commission could, in theory, come up with something that is non-viable, and that is where the safety advice is really important. So do we have a precise memorial design at the moment that encompasses, we wish to retain this part or this floor or this corner or this column? No, we don't. And that is, we need the commission to work through its stages of outline, design, etc. as we progress forward. So that commitment will be there. And I wouldn't want people, as Kimmy has talked about, to think that we're erasing the tower or trying to hide it. The symbolic preservation absolutely is on the table. It's important, and that is where the commitment comes from. And as I said, there's an awful lot of detail still to come, but the government will take a decision based on viability and safety grounds largely, but including some of these points absolutely that we've heard and that we respect and we understand are important, and that enables some of those conversations to move forward in parallel.
Suzanne, if the tower's been deconstructed by the time you decide you want to keep part of it and have it in a memorial, that's really a bit academic, isn't it? I mean, you made the decision to demolish the tower in September, and then, you know, after 3 years or whatever, the Royal Commission decided, yes, it'd be nice to keep the whole tower and do something with it that's going to be a completely pointless decision, isn't it? So why don't you actually get the Memorial Commission to commission a piece of work to find out what the possibilities are, come up with a list of, say, partial retention, retention to this floor, that floor. I mean, I don't think it needs to be rocket science, because there are, I know Ed has said there are lots of options, but in reality, there are certain constraints that have been put there by what's physically there and what's going to be practical.
Exactly.
So why not try and commission that piece of work from Ed to find out, so then they can have a practical set of options to put in front of the Memorial Commission to make this decision. I mean, it seems stupid.
I think they will. My point is, we've got time for all of that, because as you say, 12 years before anything starts, you know, certainly I think from our perspective, we're not talking about floors above level 10. And even below, there are, you know, very real challenges within that. So there is time for these discussions, and I completely understand the chicken and egg anxiety, because we can't answer all of these questions at this stage. But that, I think, is slightly inevitable with a very, you know, difficult decision, a difficult process, a tall building, and a community that rightly will take its time to determine the memorial. I'm not going to rush that as a conversation. There is time within that, and hypothetically, we do need to ensure that those timelines are working together and in parallel. But I can't do that yet, because we haven't made a decision on the tower. So that comes as the starting point, but it's not the conclusion of everything. It just sets in train further work that is needed to refine some of the answers to these very important questions.
And what decision is the Secretary of State going to take in September? So
he will take a principled decision on whether the tower should at least I need to get my wording carefully. I think we've got it in some of the engineering reports, but it's moved to the start of deconstruction, and that includes the timing of that. So it sets a path underway, and then, as I say, I think using the response to some of the feedback, you know, this is not a sham consultation, because some of these points that we're hearing are very important in terms of the detail. We, I think, need to reflect on kind of the scope and wording of that. But as I've said, I would certainly expect there to be a commitment that parts of the tower, those could include damaged parts not in situ, will be retained, and that the lower floors could be retained if that is what the Commission wish. And then there are ongoing conversations in parallel to the Commission's engagement to refine the detail of that methodology, which will indicate both in situ or not in situ, which parts, if that is their wish, to retain. And we can clearly accommodate that within a timeline that is 12 months before anything happens. The decision triggers the process that then there is further work to refine. And the starting point is the propping design, which is for the next 12 months. And indeed, you know, procurement of a company to work out the detail of that methodology. So, you know, certainly I've been keen to stress through our engagement events that this is not going to happen overnight. This is not going to happen suddenly. This is a long journey, and I completely you know, empathise with Kimia's distress. It is a very difficult conversation, and we are keen to hear and play into that the points that have been made about preservation. We have fed those in and been transparent about those. They've not been the forefront of that conversation to date, because that again leaps ahead of, you know, the decision that the tower carefully needs to start coming down. So it is really the sequencing of that conversation, but I understand that
decision is taken, then the tower needs to carefully come and stop.
No, sorry, that's the decision that I'm talking about in I think most likely September. But
well, that's what they're going to decide in September, is that the tower must carefully start coming down.
So the decision in September is whether to start carefully bringing the tower down. So, you know, the debate we've heard from some is can it be retained in its state now for longer? And again, I understand that perspective, but so the decision is whether to start carefully bringing it down, and if so, when. And that is effectively, you know, what we've started this conversation about, the principle of that. And some of the options are retention of the full 24 stories. As you've heard, that is more difficult given the engineering advice. And it's also about the when, and our, you know, proposal. You know, we've needed to put something on the table to effectively start this conversation because of all the questions that we're getting back, including from yourselves. The proposal is that nothing happens before the 5th anniversary, but then we move into the start of deconstruction phase, which would take, you know, at least 18 months, 2 years beyond that. So from my perspective, there is time within that for the Memorial Commission to determine if it wishes to retain any of the parts. Obviously more difficult if it's in situ, less challenging if it's not in situ. But again, that includes questions like retention of parts that are taken away, which also we need to work through exactly how we're going to do that. We can't do that yet because we don't have a deconstruction methodology. We don't have a deconstruction methodology because we haven't taken a decision on the tower.
So if I can just chip in, Suzanne, just to reiterate,
Yeah,
from a safety perspective, based on the fire damage and the ongoing deterioration, our advice has been to start deconstructing the tower as soon as possible, down to level 10 as a minimum. And I think that is key to the Secretary of State's, or that advice we've given, I think is key to the Secretary of State's decision.
What happens if you decide, oh, we'd like to retain some partial floor plates, maybe up to full 15 or something, and do something with that, and put a structure around the building to because at the moment the props remove the weight completely from the structure, so it's not load bearing. So it's still quite possible to put something around there that would remove the load bearing and then get it to have a lifetime of the memorial, which is obviously going to be longer than a building would. So surely, how does those decisions, because that affects it will no longer be a dangerous structure if the building is preserved. And the decision, doesn't it? It changes the decision to immediately demolish down to level 10 as soon as possible because it's a dangerous structure.
Yeah, but I suppose, again, I need to choose my words carefully, but I suppose extrapolating that, you could say, therefore, it's acceptable not to deconstruct anything. And as an engineer, in my view, I don't think it is, based on the level of damage that it's sustained in the fire and the ongoing damage.
I know,
so there has to therefore be a point from an engineering perspective, and the advice we've given is that it needs to come down to level 10.
But would you say
because it is a safety issue? Sorry.
Yeah. So I was going to say, you only answered one question, which was is it safe at the moment, and what do we do with it if it isn't safe? But what if you were given, like you said, if you're guided by the Memorial Commission and given some other options, you'd have to explore all of those and come up with a different set of options. Now, they're the options we just want to put on the table. I can understand the Secretary of State might take a decision in September that the long-term future of the tower wasn't viable as a whole on your advice currently, but then there needs to be those other questions need to be investigated, and I don't have any confidence that process is going to happen through the Memorial Commission, because I have no confidence in what the Memorial Commission has done so far. I mean, I'm sorry, Suzanne, but they have failed in 2 years to engage or to talk to people. Our representatives, no one knows who they are on the estate. I mean, and they were voted for by a tiny proportion of people. I think the situation is the same across the bereaved as well. So there's no feeling of connection, and I worry that whatever we end up with eventually will be something that everyone hates. I mean, because no one felt that they had their decision to listen to or their voice taken into account. I do understand your challenges in trying to do this, but I think we need to take a serious look. I mean, maybe this is not obviously a question for Ed, a serious look at how this whole process is going forward with the Memorial Commission.
Well, David, let me reflect on kind of what I'm hearing, which is lack of trust in terms of how that will be fully resolved, and a very fair question about what exactly our position will be at the decision point. And that may well, you know, that could include a much, you know, stronger commitment on, you know, what that quite means. And that could be starting a process of the work that you talk about. But again, I don't want to make a commitment without at least, you know, getting a bit more into the Commission's position. But that is for us. You're right. That is something within MHCLG's control at the point that it makes the decision. So let me reflect, and I hear your legitimate questions about quite how the decision will be framed and the process that follows from that.
Thank you, Suzanne. So I'm not sure. Do you have anything more, John?
Well, I think probably not, because the questions I was going to have been shaped by the way the meeting's gone. And given the statement about retention, which we saw on Ed's slides, and the things that have come up since then, I think probably I've said I've asked all I need to ask. We can have a chat afterwards, obviously, another time, but I don't think I need to go any further at this stage, to be honest.
Okay. Well, I mean, John, you've got lines of communication with us. You know, we're happy if those are written questions, or, you know, again, whatever you. I think there was was there a question earlier, Kimia? Meet with something that you're going to follow them on.
Seriously, whatever the content of that is, I think there needs to be quite a serious meeting about the Commission. What do you think? Are you?
Yes, about Sultan. Yes, we're not deciding about the building a pond for a state, you know, as a little project, or arranging Christmas party. It is a national disaster. 72 of our neighbors died. Just today, I had a visit from one of them, just came to my property and talking about the issue they have. It's not just they go to Geo or next of kin or here and there. One of them live under me. And I talk to them regularly. These are the worries we all share. Not everybody has a connection with those people or direct channel talking to them as their friends. And these days now they are accompanied by Sudagins, Liana, Paprika, Moira. These people, they have certain view of one group, interest of one group. And it's not, how do I say, it will make the environment toxic for the rest of the people, even if they go there. I wouldn't talk to anybody in Memorial Commission if any of these people are there, because it's none of their effing business to be there.
Okay.
Yeah, can I bring somebody from a, I don't know, a coffee shop here to sit here, join this meeting if it's got nothing to do with the person? Why they bring those people that they have certain views on Twitter, everywhere they have got different views, the people who are policing the area. Memorial Commission, they don't do their engagement. Now they bring in their bulldogs into the conversation to prove what? And beside that, if the government decide to demolish the tower, it will have massive environmental impact on us. This is the conversation you guys need to come and sit to have with us. What you're going to provide with us. Not again, we have a argument with Angie to talk to us about, no, this is the social value need to be shared to as many as possible people. How comes as many as people, they don't come and share everything else we go through with the tower here on a daily basis? It's like world need to revolve around whatever MHCLG and Memorial Commission says, while they're not affected by that at all.
Well, certainly our best. I mean, MHCLG is well aware of your concerns about the commission. Can I just be clear? I can certainly feed back this conversation to the commission, support and co-chairs. Are you planning to ask for a meeting with them, or would you like me to ask them on your behalf for a meeting?
I think you're on mute, Abbas.
Abbas.
Sorry. Yes, I had some early discussion with David today that we need to talk to them, not seeking their advice, telling the things they're doing again wrong, like the past 2 years. This is not the way they bring all those other people. At least they can't have it on our estate, and we can make sure nobody will engage with them anyway. And they shouldn't go back and tweet and say, what a wonderful it was, it went very well. Nobody turned up. Why they lie?
Yeah, it's like a virtual engagement. It's all happening on Twitter as this amazing engagement where people are giving all their views. And when you actually go to the event, there's 3 people there and a dog, and nothing is happening. No one is giving their views because they're too scared to say anything in front of the people they bring with their creche and their kids' parties. I mean, honestly, the engagement events are very poor. They've actually started off badly and got worse. So I hate to imagine what the thing they're planning on our estate is going to be.
Well, as I say, I will ensure that, we feed back so they're aware of this discussion and your concerns. I will leave it to you if you want to have a meeting with them. But of course, we would encourage them to, reach out and speak to you and, certainly, listen to your concerns.
But Suzanne, would you come? Because I think it would be very helpful to have MHCLG in the room when we have the meeting with the Royal Commission. Because I am happy to do that. I mean, I would see it as a commission meeting, a meeting between you and the commission. So it would be for the commission to invite me to do that. I don't want to, I don't think I can guarantee that if they wouldn't want to, they because of this conversation, they're trying to establish their own space, so they might not want MHCLG in the room, but obviously if you requested that, then I'm sure again they would consider that.
But they have MHCLG in all their meetings.
Yeah,
but my role's a bit different.
But it's still there. I mean, Susan, the problem I have is that they're going to have a meeting with them and then they're going to come back to you and say it went really well, everything was great, we sorted all the problems out, just like all the other times that anything has happened. Well,
I'm sure you would give me a different version of events if that was the case. But again, the offer is there from my perspective. It wouldn't be my meeting, but I'm happy to attend if both parties, would find that helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, we find it helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Should we leave it there? David, Abbas, do you want us to follow up with Kimia? I'm a bit worried that Kimia kind of has missed some of the conversation, or might.
Yeah, look, if Kimia wants to be in the meeting, she can join the meeting. She doesn't. Okay. She doesn't. Anyway, we want to talk to them and tell them. You will witness what we want to tell them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll leave that to you. But again, come back to us, John. Do come back to us. That route of communication is there. Can I thank John, Ed, and Andrew for their time this morning? Let's follow up in the way that we've heard clearly your concerns and perspectives, which I think is helpful in relation to the decision and how that's framed. And then we'll leave it to you regarding the commission and a possible further meeting to work through some of this.
Thank you, Suzanne. Could I just thank Ed and Andrew? I know that it hasn't been as extensive as I thought it might be, but nonetheless, that's the meeting just taken a different direction, which I think has been helpful in the round. But thank you both for coming along anyway.
No
thank you for the time.
I was to say thanks to John, and just thanks everyone, and thanks to Ed and Andrew for coming along. I know it probably wasn't the meeting you were expecting, but it's been very useful what you've said. And I'd also like to thank Matt and everyone. I mean, at least we're talking here and doing some form of engagement. So I'd like to try and improve the other bits of the engagement.
Yeah,
Understood.
and one positive thing is Matt and site team, they've been always helpful, especially with the anniversary with us. So whenever we needed, yeah, thank you, Matt. And I think Matt on his own, he does more engagement than the whole memorial committee.
Well, let's leave it there with a positive.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day.
You too, thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.